Within the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! There are two main types of decks as seen by the community. Those are linear decks and complex decks. And in today's video, I want to discuss the differences and the positives and negatives of both these linear decks and these complex decks. So let's get right into it. So on the pro side for linear decks are very user-friendly, making them perfect for new players. Additionally, linear decks can provide a nice break to veteran players who want to take a break from complex decks, and most of these linear decks are seen as very anti-meta, examples being things like Yosenju and Bujin. However, on the con side for linear decks, they are very quick to stale as they only have one core strategy. They're very easy to side for and really have their strategy dissected and have the tables turned against them. And they aren't very flexible, so they can't really flex to a situation if things go pear-shaped. Now then, on the complex decks pros, we have the fact that they are very flexible, and they are very, very, very interesting to learn and to play, and that attracts a lot of veteran players who really want a nice challenge to them. Additionally, they push players to learn new card interactions and complex card interactions, and they are very slow to stale, so they can be played for a long period of time, even if they bump down to a rogue status or below. However, complex decks do also have cons. For example, complex decks can have turns that just go on forever. I'm looking at you, Ritual Beast. Kanahawk to 1 was a fair hit. You have to deal with that. And over the course of an event, it does tax on one's mind, and it can lead to more and more mistakes. Building off of that, one little mistake sometimes in your big combos could lead to your whole strategy imploding when it comes to complex decks, so a near mastery has to be learnt before you could take that deck to any very serious kind of tournaments. And a lot of times, these decks can be very fragile. Sometimes, if you get Veiler dropped on your playmaker, then you have no real game. You can't really do anything. And it sucks when that happens. Main example with that being Jiaotu for, say, Yang Zings, and main with Eyes of Blue for Blue Eyes. But enough pros and cons for now. I'm sure you guys want to hear what I think of linear decks and complex decks. Well, I feel linear decks are very much a necessary part of Yu-Gi-Oh! I think they're a good thing, because you can't just hand a newcomer full power Necros. Who's going to learn from that? No one, really. You have to ease people into the game. Things have to be simple to start out with and get more complex. You have to have a way for people to get in. Because if we don't, then the game's just inaccessible, and then we're just going to stagnate as a community. And I mean, I know I hate losing to, say, Dark Law Turbo, or you hate losing to Demise Cleese, or he hates losing to Yosenju. Well, it's kind of tough luck in that regard, because that's how the game is. There are many different types of decks and many different types of counters. You don't like losing to that so-called linear deck, or helmet deck as you may insult it? Well, side for it hard. Now then, if someone is playing a deck you don't like to face against, well, that doesn't give you the right to call them degenerate garbage. We're all on the same team. We're all Yu-Gi-Oh! Players. We have to come together more as a community when it comes to these sort of things. Respect each other's decisions and respect each other as people. Or even disagree with each other's opinions, but respect them as people and talk about it. That's even better, actually. Anyways, let's move on to what I like to call the linear versus complex scale. So me and a couple friends kicked around a bunch of ideas. We made this scale, and I feel that it is very accurate, so let's get right into it. So, you see on the lower end over there, that's more linear decks, so things like Bujins and Tellarknights and whatnot are over there. And moving on into the middle, you see more decks with a lot more variance. These decks have a lot more complexity when it comes to some of their plays, but generally have the same win condition. So moving on into the upper areas, we start to see decks like Odd Eyes Magicians, Blue Eyes, and Yang Zing. as we could see, there's a lot more variance in how these decks are played, and a lot more variance in these decks' strict win conditions, so to speak. So moving on, we see in our upper echelon at around the 8 out of 10 mark, we have things like Necros, Sylvans, Synchrons, and full power D-Rulers. Now all these decks required a decent amount of knowledge of the game itself to pilot, but an even stricter amount of knowledge needed to actually pilot the deck itself. One needed to know the very nuances and the ins and outs of each card in said deck in order to properly pilot it. And finally, we have our Master of Complexity, Synchrofusionist. Synchrofusionist as a deck is very hard to wrap your mind around because it is one of the only decks in the game that will deck you out if you decide to put a Max C challenge against them. Synchrofusionist also checks every mark when it comes to complex decks. It's got multiple win conditions. It's got multiple ways to achieve said win conditions. It requires a lot of knowledge, and it is a very, very interesting deck to learn and to play. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Sorry I've kind of remade this video. It was just I really wasn't satisfied with the last version of it, but I felt like I had to push out something, so I fixed it now, and hopefully this will be the version that really sticks. Thank you as always, and have a good night.